In the early summer of 325 AD, behind the heavily guarded doors of an imperial palace in Asia Minor, a massive council was convened. It was a high-level imperial summit, not open to the general public. Inside this grand hall, over 300 men sat under the gaze of the ultimate authority on earth, the Roman Emperor. They were not generals planning a military campaign. They were bishops, convened under imperial authority to debate and define the very nature of God. Was Jesus of Nazareth a mortal creation, or the eternal creator of the universe? And the specific writings of Arius and his loyalists, they would be condemned to the flames. What happened behind these doors did not just rewrite theology, it forged a tool of absolute geopolitical power that would alter Europe for the next 2,000 years. To understand the gravity of the Council of Nicaea, we must strip away the stained glass and the mythology. We must look at the raw power dynamics of the Roman Empire in the 4th century. For nearly 300 years, the Roman state had operated on a simple mechanism of control: military supremacy and a pantheon of gods that legitimized the emperor. But by the 300s, the empire was bleeding. It had barely survived the crisis of the 3rd century. Civil wars had ravaged the economy. Usurpers had fractured the military. And the old gods? They were losing their grip on the populace. Enter Constantine the Great. Constantine was not just a soft, pious saint. He was a politically pragmatic, religiously complex ruler who had just spent decades defeating his political rivals to become the sole, undisputed ruler of the Roman world. He understood a fundamental law of geopolitics. An empire stretched across 3 continents cannot be held together by swords alone. It requires a unified ideology. He looked at Christianity, a once persecuted underground sect that had spread like a virus through the trade routes and military camps, and saw not just a religion, but a highly organized, state-spanning infrastructure. He legalized it. He funded it. He intended to use it as a powerful tool for unity and governance in his new Roman order. But there was a catastrophic problem. The Christians were tearing each other apart. The crisis did not start in Rome. It started in Alexandria, the intellectual and economic powerhouse of Egypt. In the year 318 AD, a charismatic and highly popular priest named Arius began preaching a logical yet highly controversial doctrine. Arius argued that if God the Father was the absolute creator and Jesus was the Son, then logic dictated that the Son must have been created by the Father at a specific point in time. His famous slogan echoed through the docks and markets of Alexandria: "There was a time when the Son was not." To Arius, Jesus was divine, but he was subordinate, a supreme creation, but not the eternal God himself. The Bishop of Alexandria, a man named Alexander, saw this not just as heresy, but as a direct threat to the core mystery of the faith. Alexander believed that the Father and the Son were co-eternal, equal, the exact same entity. What started as an academic debate in a church quickly spilled into the streets. The public controversy spread widely. Bakers, merchants, and soldiers argued passionately over the nature of the Trinity. Rival factions within the church began excommunicating each other. The theological contagion spread from Egypt, up the coast of the Levant, and into the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. For Constantine, sitting in his new capital, this was a geopolitical nightmare. He had just conquered the East. He needed stability, taxation, and order. Instead, his newly adopted tool for unity was malfunctioning. A divided church meant a divided population, and a divided population meant civil war. Constantine did not care deeply about the philosophical nuances of whether the sun was created out of nothing or eternally begotten. He cared about consensus. He cared about power. So, he made an unprecedented move. He utilized the cursus publicus, the elite Roman imperial postal service, usually reserved for generals and top state officials. He offered state sponsorship to bring bishops from across the known world. He commanded them to travel to a small, heavily fortified city near his capital. The city was Nicaea, and the debate over the nature of God would be settled under the watchful eye of the empire. May 325 AD. Imagine the psychological impact of this moment. About 12 years earlier, under Emperor Diocletian, the Roman state was actively hunting these men down. Many of the bishops arriving at Nicaea bore the horrific, visible scars of state persecution. They had survived the Great Persecution. Now, the very same empire had paid for their travel, lodged them in luxurious palaces, and surrounded them with the elite imperial guard. It was a masterclass in psychological domination by Constantine. They were brought into the grand hall of the imperial palace. This was to be an official high-level imperial summit. The fate of the universe's creator would be decided not by the masses, but by a select council of geopolitical elites. When Constantine entered the hall, the atmosphere froze. He did not enter wearing the traditional armor of a Roman general. He entered draped in purple silk, adorned with gold and precious stones, projecting the aura of a divine monarch. He walked past the scarred veterans of the faith, sat on a golden throne at the center of the room, and delivered his opening address in fluent Latin. His message was polite, but the underlying pressure was unmistakable. Settle this dispute. Unify the church. Do not leave this room divided. The debates that followed were fierce, chaotic, and brutal. At the center of the storm was Arius himself, standing before the most powerful men in the world, defending his belief that the sun was a created being. According to historical accounts, the tension in the room snapped. Later traditions even claim that Nicholas of Myra, the bishop who would centuries later be mythologized as Santa Claus, was so enraged by Arius's arguments that he reportedly walked across the floor and struck Arius in the face. But physical violence was quickly suppressed. The real war was waged over a single, highly dangerous Greek word. The anti-Arian faction, officially led by Bishop Alexander and supported by his brilliant, uncompromising young deacon Athanasius, needed an ironclad way to define God. They needed a formula that would permanently lock Arius out of the church. The council's key theological advisors proposed the word homoousios. It translates roughly to of the same substance, or consubstantial. They argued that God the Father and God the Son were composed of the exact same divine material. They were indivisible. This was a radical move. The word homoousios was not in the Bible. It was a term with roots in Gnostic and Hermetic traditions, rather than mainstream scripture. Many bishops were highly uncomfortable with it. It sounded too academic, too far removed from traditional texts. But Constantine was watching. The emperor threw his powerful political support behind the word homoousios. He signaled to the room that this was the accepted imperial consensus. The bishops, many of whom had felt the agonizing burn of Roman persecution in their youth, suddenly understood the geopolitical reality of the situation. The emperor was heavily backing a standardized, state-approved truth. The church was no longer an independent underground resistance. It was now increasingly aligned with imperial authority. After weeks of intense debate, the council drafted a document. It would become known as the Nicene Creed. It was a definitive, binding statement of faith. It explicitly declared that Jesus Christ was begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father. But the creed was not just a declaration of belief. It was a mechanism for unity. At the bottom of the document, they attached the anathemas, a series of curses specifically targeting Arius and anyone who supported him. Constantine made the final ultimatum clear: sign the document, or face immediate exile from the Roman Empire. You either agreed with the state's definition of God, or you ceased to exist within the state's borders. Faced with the pressure of an absolute monarch, the resistance crumbled. Out of over 300 bishops, only 2 men, along with Arius, refused to sign. The consensus was reached. The doctrine was legally backed by the state. Immediately, Constantine activated the coercive power of the Roman military. Arius and his loyalists were banished to the remote fringes of the empire. But Constantine went further. To ensure that this Imperial Council permanently erased the ideological threat, he ordered the suppression of the opposition's literature. An imperial edict was issued demanding the writings of Arius be gathered and burned, with severe punishments for anyone hiding them. The state now had a heavy hand in defining the truth. The Council of Nicaea did not invent the Christian Bible, nor did it randomly throw out gospels to hide secrets from the public. What it actually did was far more profound and far more terrifying. Nicaea proved that religion and statecraft were beginning to merge into a single, powerful system. Constantine had successfully utilized the faith as a tool for unity. He created a standardized religious doctrine that could serve as the ideological software for the hardware of the Roman Empire. The Church, once a victim of imperial persecution, had now learned how to navigate the sword of the state to handle its own internal disputes. The precedent set in that room in 325 AD would define the course of human history. It laid the early groundwork for the Middle Ages, the idea that the state has an interest in enforcing religious orthodoxy to maintain societal order. But the irony of history is ruthless. Constantine believed he had solved the crisis. He believed the Nicene Creed would create permanent stability. He was wrong. Arianism did not die. It mutated. It spread to the Germanic tribes outside the empire, the Goths and the Vandals, largely through the missionary work of figures like Ulfilas. These very tribes would eventually shatter the Roman frontiers and sack Rome itself and the unified church that Constantine tried to build. It was fundamentally unstable. The alliance between the cross and the sword was built on a fragile geopolitical fault line. The institution that was standardized in Nicaea would eventually grow so powerful and so politically divided that it would inevitably tear the known world in half. To see exactly how this unified Christian empire eventually suffered a catastrophic collapse, fracturing into bitter enemies and plunging Europe into a geopolitical Cold War. Click the video on your screen right now to watch our full deep dive documentary on the Great Schism of 1054. History is not written by the peaceful. It is written by those who control the narrative. Stay epic and stay curious.